Hello, everyone, and welcome to our class today, where we are going to discuss variables in research. And the term variable, or the reason why we are going to discuss variables, it is because there are things in research we call basic elements of scientific research. And this, in very simple terms, are the language, or it is what researchers use to communicate to one another. They are the terms that researchers, because remember, research is a discipline, and every discipline has got its own language. If you go to the lawyers, there is the way they will speak, and if you are not one of them, then you might get lost in their conversation. When you go to any other profession, if you go to the doctors, and I know many of us have been to a doctor, then you know that they will give you a prescription that you may not be able to decode because you don't understand the language. And medicine or medical sciences is another discipline, and they have their own language. So researchers also, because research is a discipline, they have their own language. And this language is what is basically called basic elements of scientific research. And there are quite a number of them, but today we will concentrate on variables. And the reason why we will concentrate on the variables, it is because I have got these two questions, and this is what we are going to answer today. Many people have been asking me to discuss moderating variables, to discuss intervening, to discuss extraneous variables, and I combined all of them, and we are going to discuss the various types of variables. The other question that is very common is the scale of measurement. What are these scales of measurement, and how can I identify between categorical variable and numerical variable, qualitative variable and quantitative variable? How do I differentiate the two? So today, we are going to answer those two questions on the types of variables, and then we also discuss the scales of measurement, hoping that by the time we finish, we will have answered that question. So before I get into the slides, I want us to look at this document, or this part of a student work, because I know many of us who are here, you are either writing your proposal, you are either writing your project or thesis or dissertation, or you are in class doing research method in preparation too. So why do universities and institutions of higher learning take you through research and also statistical methods? The reason why you have the coursework called research methods is because once you finish, you will be expected to identify a problem, and we discussed what is a problem last week, and we will still discuss it next week. And from the problem, you come up with a title, and then you start writing your proposal from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 3. That is the proposal. Once it has been accepted, then you go on to write your chapter 4 and chapter 5. So when we look at your document, the first thing we see is a title or a topic. Is there a difference between the two? Is there a difference between a research title and a research topic? Of course, there is a very big difference between the two. But today, I want us to talk about the topic and talk about the variables before we get into our notes and our slides for today. So if you look at this particular title, it is talking about influence of institutional capacity on performance of parastatals, a case of Kenya Meat Commission Modernization Project. This is part of a student's work that I have just cut. So when we look at your title, when you're doing your proposal, the first thing that we should be clear of is what are your variables? What do you want to study? And that is where the variables are coming in. And from this one, we have institutional capacity as the independent variable, and we have performance of parastatals as the dependent variable. Then, of course, now a case of this we shall be discussing further when we are talking about designs. But when it is a case of then it tells you that with a quantitative study that you most likely use survey, or it can also use mixed method approach, but we'll be talking about that later on. Not today, but in another lesson. And of course, then this is the scope. So the person wants to deal with this institutional capacity and performance in this particular institution. So that is one way in which you can write your title. And of course, you can talk about influence of, you can talk about effects of, you can talk about effectiveness of, you can talk about effects. Yes, I've mentioned about effects. And all these terms that you use, they all have they will determine the design that you're going to use. You cannot say factors influencing and then you use case study, because factors influencing, immediately you have such a title. That means that study can only be survey, but we'll discuss that later on. There are also other institutions of higher learning which do not allow students to use these terms, so that they give you the flexibility of identify the design that best explains your study. And with that, you can talk about institutional capacity and performance of parastatals, a case of the same Kenya Meat Commission. Again, this is the independent variable, and this is the dependent variable. Then other institution, again, based on your level of study, they can allow you, or they can ask you to have 3 variables. So you have institutional capacity, monitoring and evaluation practices, and performance of parastatals. This, I hope you can see my slide. 1 minute, I see whether I am sharing. Oh, let me remove this. Just give me a minute, and then I can share. Sorry, I have been talking about a document that probably you cannot see. Let me just go back to it in a minute so that we move together. Yes, so this is the Word document that I have been talking about. And please feel free to ask any question on the comment section, and I will respond as we progress. So this is what I was talking about. So we talked about a research title and a research topic. There is a difference between the two. So there is a way you can write the title, either with influence of. Some universities now, especially institutions of higher learning, are discouraging their students from using such words. Then you can talk about the variables of the study. So you talk about institutional capacity and performance of parastatals. And then some, especially at PhD level, may require you to add another one. And this is what is called a moderating variable. So we have institutional capacity, independent variable, monitoring and evaluation practices, independent variable, but now moderating, and we will differentiate between the two. And then we have performance, which is the dependent variable of the study. So once you have a problem, a research problem, then it is from the dependent variable that you are able to identify the variables of the study. It is from this institutional capacity, for instance, that you are able to identify the variables of the study. Those are the ones that will enable you to come up with your research objectives, research questions, and the hypothesis. And they are the same ones that you'll be able to write your literature review in chapter 2. So if we go to this student's work at the objectives of the study, so the objective, the variables that the student has been able to come up with from the word institutional capacity is, 1, the issue of capacity building. You can see the word performance does not change because this is the dependent variable. The other one is stakeholder participation. Performance, again, is still the dependent variable. Then we have resource mobilization, performance of parastatals, and then we have employee attitude, and then we have performance of parastatals. So capacity building, stakeholder participation, resource mobilization, and employees' attitudes is what the student was able to identify as some of the issues that influence performance of parastatals, and it is what is called institutional capacity. Sorry about that. So variables are very key. Variables are very key in any research. You cannot do any research unless you have identified the variables of the study. And this one we will start from the title and will be across the whole document, because even when you write your background, you're writing your literature review, you are talking about how your variables relate as in your work. So today we are going to discuss variables in research, but we also look at a few of the other basic elements of scientific research that we need to be aware of, and mostly why we have chosen to talk about the variables only. So I hope the slides are clear. So those are the two questions that we are going to answer today. Last week, we defined what is research. And now we are saying that the terms that help to transform research idea into a phenomena. Remember, we said a phenomena is an object of investigation. A phenomena is an object of investigation. So what transforms that idea is what is called the basic elements of scientific research. And in very simple terms, we said these elements is the language of researchers. It is what researchers use to communicate with one another. So that if I hear the word conceptual framework, then I will not be lost as a researcher. For somebody else, they may not understand what a conceptual framework is. If I talk about research questions, then to somebody else, they will not confuse research questions with questions of research. And we'll be looking at the difference between the two. So when you talk about the word relations, you talk about the word correlation. To a researcher, they will understand. Then those are the ones we call the basic elements of scientific research. There are quite a number of them, but I have listed the most common one. And I would request you to make sure that you understand what these elements mean. So we have the word concept, we have construct, we have variables, we have relations, we have research problem, we have purpose of the study, objectives of the study, research questions, hypothesis, definition of terms, conceptual framework, and theoretical framework. These are terms that if you're doing research, you must come across them and you must understand them and write them the way they are supposed to be written. So today we are going to discuss variables. The word variable comes from the word vary. It comes from the word vary, or it stands for variation. It means that when you hear the word variable, the first thing that should come into your mind is that whatever I am looking at must be varying within a class of objects, within a class of what I am observing. There must be some variation. And when we talk about variation, we are saying that if I'm looking at phones, then I can say I have a Samsung, I have a Nokia, I have an iPhone, and etc. As long as I can say this is an iPhone, this is a Samsung, this is a Nokia, there is some variation, then that is a variable. If I talk about Samsung and I say this is Samsung S24, this is Samsung A8, this is Samsung A53, again, the model is Samsung, but there is variation, then that is a variable. If I say in this class, there are males and females, then it means gender, in this case, is a variable. For in research, we now make variables, we define variables for what they are supposed to be done with. A variable is the one that researchers measure. And by measuring, we mean assigning numbers or observation. Assigning numbers or observation. So we define a variable as a measurable characteristic which assumes different, and you can see the word different, characteristics among the subjects. It assumes different characteristics. That means it varies. So if I'm holding cups and I can say I have a red one, a white one, and a green one, that the color of the cup is a variable. If I can say I have a small one, I have a big one, again, the size is a variable. And I want you to realize that there is no word that is cast on stone that it must be a variable. There is no concept that is cast that it must be a variable. For instance, if in this class we are all females, then gender is not a variable. It now becomes a constant. If we are all males, the same thing. If we are all married, then marital status is not a variable. Something becomes a variable only if there is variation. Only if there is variation. If we can talk about height, one is 5.1, another one is 2 point, another one is 7, another one is 6, then that is a variable. But if there is no variation, it becomes a constant. So I want you to look at where you are in 1 minute and identify the variables that you are able to pick. So you are seated somewhere, probably there are books. So you can say, I have a textbook, I have an exercise book. In that case, books in that sense is a variable. So it is important to emphasize this again, that for something to qualify to be considered as a variable, it must vary. It must vary. If all of them are identical, they are called constants. So there are three things that I want you to note as far as variables are concerned. Number one, variables vary. They must vary. The other one is that variables are measurable. They are measurable. And that is what researchers use to measure or to solve the research problem. So variables are measurable. The other thing is variables are operationally defined. Operationally defined. If I allow me to go back to the examples, we have here number 10 as definition of terms. This means operational definition of variables, operational definition of variables. And that means you define a term based on its measure, based on how you are measuring it, not conceptual definition, not the definition that we find in textbooks. For instance, if you can remember the topic that we had, the one I was showing before, of institutional capacity and performance of parastatals in Kenya, or parastatals and parastatals, and then the student is doing in an institution in Kenya called Kenya Meat Commission. This person will define the term performance, institutional capacity operationally. That means how they are measuring it, not how it is in the dictionary or defined by somebody else. So if I was the one probably just thinking, I've not looked at the operational definition that the student has used. So we can talk about performance as the amount of money that Kenya Meat Commission has been able to make in the financial year 2023-2024. That is not a definition that you can find in textbook. That is an operational definition of my variable performance. So when I'm going to do this study, my interest as far as dependent variable is concerned will be looking at the books of Kenya Meat Commission and looking at how much have they been able to make in the year 2023-2024 compared to what probably they had proposed to do. That is the definition. You can also be doing the same study and you find that your definition will differ from my definition. So those three are very important. So variables, they vary. Variables are measurable. Variables are operationally defined. So we now look at the types of variables to answer the question, the various types of variables that we interact with, especially for us who are social scientists. The first one and the simplest is the IVDV, the independent dependent variable. Independent dependent variable. I will start with an example. And please feel free to put a question on the chat. I will respond as we continue. If, for instance, I have ulcers, I hope all of us understand, if I have ulcers and these ulcers are triggered when I take milk or I eat green vegetables, then it tells me that if I have not drank milk, if I have not eaten greens, then that ulcer in the body is calm, it is quiet. But immediately I take milk, immediately I eat greens, then the pain comes up. So when you have not eaten, this ulcer is calm and quiet. When you drink the milk, this ulcer starts paining. So what is it saying? That there is a relationship between my drinking milk and the pain, or my eating the greens and the pain. There is a relationship between the two. And when you bring them to research, that is what we call independent and dependent variable. And those are the two that must be in the topic, because the presence of IV, and when I say IV, I'm talking about independent, influences or causes, and I'll use the word cause in quotes, and I will explain why, for the dependent variable to occur. So as long as there is no independent variable, then there is no dependent variable. These two will always go hand in hand. IV influences DV. When the IV is manipulated, there is a change on DV. If I want to increase my yield on the farm, I will have to think about the fertilizer. I will have to think about the type of soil that I have, so that once I probably increase the fertilizer, and this is very hypothetical, then chances are my yield is going to increase. So as long as I have not changed the amount of fertilizer, then my yield is not changing. So fertilizer has an influence on the yield. I increase it, I increase the yield. I decrease it, I decrease the yield. So what am I doing? I am manipulating. I am changing the amount of fertilizer for me to see a change on the yield. I am a student. The amount of hours I put when I am studying will determine my performance. I take my time, a lot of it revising, my performance becomes good. I relax and do my other things instead of reading, and my performance is not good. So as long as I manipulate, I change the time, the number of hours I am spending revising, then my performance will not change. And that is where we talk about the IVDV. So IV is the variable that the researcher manipulates. By manipulation in research, we mean making changes too. And once you manipulate the IV, you see it change on the DV. So there will be a change on the DV. And we are saying you are able to see the change on DV because of manipulating the IV. So the DV is that variable, the dependent variable is that variable which is expected to change as a result of the presence or absence or magnitude of the IV. So presence, reading, change my performance. Absence, I am not reading, and so also the performance will change. Magnitude, maybe in terms of numbers, then there will be a change in the performance. And when you're looking at this slide, there is this part that says that the IV is the presumed cause of changes in the values of the DV. And I have put the word cause in quotes because in research, to determine causality, it is not something that you just determine that X causes Y. In the first place, for you to say X causes Y, you must be using experimental design and you must have controlled all the extraneous variables. And when we talk about the designs, it will become more clear. So that is why I've put the word cause in quotes, but it is to make it more clear that the presumed cause of change on the DV, it is because of the IV. And so even in the title, even in your title, you have the IV that is supposed to bring a change on the DV. And those two must be very clear on your title. And this I need to make it clear. When you're doing a qualitative study, this may not, a purely qualitative study, this may not hold. The reason is because if for instance, I am doing a case study of or a biography of, for instance, I want to study Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta was the first president in Kenya. So what are my title may be the life story or the life history of Jomo Kenyatta. So in this case, I will be writing his biography. And therefore, in that title, we will not have IVDV. But if your study is mixed method and quantitative, the title must have the IVDV. And again, they will become more clear when we talk about the designs. So remember, that is the first one. And I have a number of questions here that I would want you to look at and see whether there is any that you may not be able to identify the independent and the dependent variable. I'll pause for 2 minutes. If there is any that you cannot attempt, please ask. You can just put it on the chat. And thank you for those who have logged in. Thank you, Mukami. Clever Point, I can see you. Thank you. Hilary, I can see you. Thank you. BD, I can see you. Thank you. I hope, BD, you are asking to discuss in depth. Discuss in depth the dependent and independent variables in research topics. I hope you have been able to get that, but if not, feel free to ask the question again. Any one of us who is not able to identify IVDV in these questions? Thank you. Going home again. Thank you for logging in and thank you for your kind comments. I appreciate. Any of this that you cannot identify the IVDV? All right, so I'll run through them just to make sure that we are all on the same page and I have not lost anyone. So the first one, institutional capacity, is the IV. Performance of government institution is the DV. The second one, monitoring and evaluation practices, is the IV. Sustainability of community projects is the DV. The third one, COVID-19, the effects of COVID-19, is the IV. Performance of small businesses is the DV. The fourth one, performance and number of hours a student attends. Performance is the DV, the dependent. A number of hours a student attends class is the IV. It is the IV. And this question, number 4, should tell you that don't always imagine that what is before on or add is always the IV. No, you have to look at the two and ask yourself what influences the other. Then we have effectiveness of group work on students' performance. Effectiveness of group work is the IV. Students' performance is the DV. Factors determining the performance of employees in company X. Factors is the IV. Performance of employees in company X is the DV. Amount of fertilizer and yield. Amount of fertilizer is the IV and yield is the DV. So that is how they are. So I want to believe that all of us were able to identify that. I don't see any question. And so I will move on to the next one. Confounding variables. So we have moved from IVDV and we have said those two, they always move together. You cannot say independent on its own without talking about the dependent. The two of them must go hand in hand because you can see IV influences DV. IV causes DV to appear. So without IV, there is no DV. Then we have this number 2, confounding. And just like the word suggests, this is something that confuses. This is a variable that is confusing. It is confusing the good relationship between IV, DV. Imagine what we have discussed in variable number 1, that the two of them coexist. They live so well. When the IV is there, DV appears. When you change IV, DV also changes. Now you bring something that comes in between to confuse this relationship, this good relationship between the two. Now imagine, I like using this example because it is something that we can identify with. Imagine in a family, you have a husband and a wife. A good relationship happens, or it is there between them. So you have a husband and you have a wife, good family. They are in love, they have come together, they are raising their family very well. Then in the course of time, 5-10 years, the man decides, I think there are too many women in the world. Why should I only have one? And they therefore go and look for a girlfriend. And now that girlfriend comes in between this good relationship. Who is she? She is a confounding variable. So she has come to confuse. She has come to bring conflict between this IVDV. Now, the question that I want you to put in your mind is, when DV changes, let's assume DV is the husband and IV is the wife. And I'm saying this because, you know, the things that the woman is doing at home, good ones, are making the husband very happy. So now you have brought in somebody here in between. So when this man is so happy, is it because of the wife or is it because of this girl? Who has brought in this happiness? When this man is very stressed, who has brought the stress? Is it the woman, the wife, or is it the girlfriend? So you can see that confusion. And it is the confusion that happens in research when there are confounding variables. So these are variables that influences the dependent variable, and their effect or their influence may be confused with that of the IV. Just like I have said, this man has started gaining weight. He looks very good. Is it because he eats at home or because somebody else is cooking for him? So who is this here who makes this dependent variable change? So, and there are two types of confounding variables. We have intervening and we have extraneous. We have intervening and we have extraneous. I will start with intervening. This one, what I would want you to note first is what I have put on bold. 1, they cannot be seen. Number 2, they cannot be measured. Number 3, they cannot be manipulated. So these are factors, these are the variables that affect the change on the DV, but they cannot be seen. Sometimes they are not measured. Sometimes they cannot be manipulated. And why is this? And when I say they cannot be measured, it does not mean it cannot be done 100%. I'll be explaining in a minute. Because many of the time, they have to do with an individual's feelings. I want to give an example. If we are in the same class, all of us, and we do a cut now, we do a cut, and I get 100%, and you get 40, 30, 20, chances are you will imagine that I am very brilliant because I've gotten 100%. What are you trying to say? That beyond being taught, my IQ is also high. And these are all hypothetical examples. But I cannot remove my IQ and leave and place it on the table so that you can see. It is not like a phone that I would say, yes, this phone is this variable X and it is on the table. This is something within me that has influenced my performance, but you are not able to manipulate it. The teacher cannot tell me that now, Lydia, assume you don't have a high IQ so that you don't perform as well as you performed last time. Let me use another example. If you go to class to teach, if there is any teacher in this class, and the students are bored, you may not be able to measure how much boredom is in this class. But when you start talking and probably you ask them a question, you realize nobody is responding. Baby, all of them are seated like this, looking at you, wondering, when will this class be over? So boredom influences their absorption of the content that you are teaching. So, but you cannot tell them, pretend you are not bored. When I go for teaching practice to supervise my student teachers, they already have told the students before, today I'm being supervised. So please make sure that you are excited in class. It's a very superficial class, and we are able to tell. The student looks so excited, and it is 3 p.m. The sun is so hot, but they look excited because already they were told, I'm being supervised. So you see now, if those students are given an exam after that class, either they will perform very well or they will not, because the excitement was very superficial, or they may perform very well because in that superficial environment they were able to understand. But you cannot tell them remove your excitement or pretend you are not. So when we talk about intervening, these are variables that the researcher must be aware of. However, they are not able to remove them. They are not able to make a change in them. They are not able to, because they can only be inferred from the effects of the dependent variable. So when I say the word measure, it does not mean that it cannot be done completely. It is because we are able to infer from the effects on the dependent variable. What does this mean? If I go back to my example of performance, if we are in class and I have performed very well, the teacher may conclude Lydia may be having a very high IQ. You are inferring that variable called IQ from my performance. But even as we started, I never said, me, I have a very high IQ, so I'm going to perform very well. No, it is what I have given that will make you, or will tell you that this person has a high IQ. We have all met our friends in one way or the other. There is a person you can meet with. When you sit down to talk, you conclude this person is very brilliant. They didn't come written here brilliant. They didn't place it on the table that you can see they are brilliant. But from the way they are conversing with you, the way they are articulating issues, you then conclude this is a brilliant person. That is an intervening variable. If, for instance, you are going to sell something to them, or you are going to get, to convince them to do something for you, that brilliancy may make you trust them in whatever you are discussing. It will make you trust them. But you see, it was not written. You could not see it, but you are able to infer from their behavior. So as you do research, make sure you identify intervening variables so that you are aware of them, because they influence your data, they influence your analysis. And when we are drawing the conceptual framework, we normally show these confounding variables, so that even as you discuss your results, at the back of your mind, you know that this intervening variable is the one that has likely affected this one. If I am going to do a study in schools in Nairobi, for instance, Nairobi is the capital center of Kenya, or you are going to schools that are well endowed and others are not well endowed. I'm doing a research in the whole of Nairobi. Definitely, the type of school will affect my study. But I cannot go to the slum and tell the students there, pretend that now you are in a very good school, which is well endowed. So as I go to from school X in a slum area, I go to another one in a high ed area, I know type of school in this study will affect my results. But because I can't remove it, I can't manipulate it. I can't ask the students to pretend that they are in a very good school. You are working with what you have. Then it means that as I do my results, as I do my analysis, I know, even my conceptual framework shows that type of school is an intervening variable. Then we come to extraneous. Extraneous. This one must be seen, must be controlled. It must be controlled. To control is to remove their effect. So extraneous variables, and I have quoted a book here, is any uncontrolled variable which influences the outcome of the study or the effect of the independent on the dependent variable. They are not related and they affect the dependent. So there is an NB. They must be controlled. To control is to remove their effects. So remember intervening, we said you are not able to control them, because you cannot see. Sometimes you are not able to manipulate. Sometimes you are not able to measure, So they are there, but there is nothing much you can do, but you remember to put them in your conceptual and explain how they are affecting your study. Now we have the next confounding variable. This must be removed. And the example I was giving of a family, I think it will fit very well. Many women, when they hear that there is somebody else who has come to interfere with her good family, most of the time they fight this girl. So they will fight this person who has come to confound the good relationship between IV and DV. So what is this woman of the house doing? She is removing the effect. She's removing this person who came to confound. That is an extraneous variable. The other one, if they are there and they are not known, now we can refer to them as intervening. So you may be at home, there is somebody, but you don't know. You are not even aware. You are imagining you are the only one. Good for you, because you'll be happy. But that's an intervening variable. But when you know it, then you must control. You must remove it. Let me give an example. I'll use the same example of teaching, doing a study in Nairobi. When I want to study performance of pupils or students in Nairobi County, and I realize that the type of school is a variable that will affect my study. It will affect my study. Then what do? I may remove the effect. It now becomes my extraneous. I will remove the effect of type of school or socioeconomic status by only studying the schools that are in the same socioeconomic setting. Therefore, I will do my study. When I'm talking about my population, the population is Nairobi County, but my sample will be the schools that are in the slum area. So what have I done? I have removed the effect of the type of school or the socioeconomic status of their parents so that it doesn't affect my study. So I will only conduct my study in the schools in the slum area because I'm imagining they are all at par as far as resources, as far as teachers, equipment are concerned. So I have removed the effect. If I am doing a study, for instance, of divorce in contemporary society, and I realize that probably men are not so free to talk about divorce. So what will I do? I will use only women. So I have removed gender as an extraneous variable. So I am only using the female. And remember, I may be saying this looking like it is just something waking up and saying, no, I'm going to do this. Remember, this must be shown on the conceptual framework and must be explained. So why have you decided to only use females? And they must be supported by data. So when you are removing the effect of the extraneous variables, then there must be a reason why. And that reason is derived from, many of us imagine that we do research because of convenience. I teach at the University of Nairobi, and therefore I will study University of Nairobi. We don't do research out of convenience. We do research because there is a problem, And therefore, even when I talk about the extraneous variables, then it must be related to the study, and I must be able to remove it from the study. That is what we call control, and we'll talk about more of it when we are talking about extraneous when we are talking about experimental group. So I've given another example. If I want to study number of study hours on performance, the attitude of the teacher, group work, remedial, those are extraneous variables that needs to be removed. When you're talking about amount of fertilizer used and the yield, type of soil, is an extraneous variable. Weather and climate is an intervening variable, because what do you do with the weather and climate? If where I am, if I live in a semi-arid area, there is no way you will tell me to plant maize and expect me to harvest 100-fold yield. It's not possible because of the weather. So when I talk about weather and climate here, this is an intervening variable. You are aware of it, but there is nothing you can do about it. So it is an extraneous variable. Type of soil. If you are able to change or to remove, maybe use the farmers who only have loam soil, then that becomes an intervening variable. So this explains something, that there is no variable, like I had mentioned earlier, that is cast on stone, that it must be. There is no must. It is you as a researcher, based on the research you have done, based on the literature review you have done, that you are able to identify in my study, these four are the IV of the study. Then this one is the moderator. This one is the intervener. This one is the extraneous. And they are all explained in the conceptual framework. So I know someone may be looking at number one and saying, but all these are independent variables. Yes. To somebody else, all these are independent variables, because attitude of the teacher will affect the performance. Group work will affect performance. Remedial teaching, socioeconomic data, they will affect performance. But when I have a study, I have already identified my IV based on the preliminary literature review that I have done. Then in this, my study, attitude of the teacher is not an IV. It is an intervening, or it is an extraneous. So remember, if you cannot control it, then it is intervening. If you control, it is extraneous, and extraneous must be controlled. Intervening, you are not able to control, because sometimes you cannot see them, sometimes you cannot manipulate, sometimes you cannot. Like now, even attitude of the teacher. Teacher who has a bad attitude will affect the performance of students. But how are you able to tell the teacher to pretend to have a very positive attitude and maybe they came annoyed from home? You can't. So the way I teach today is influenced by how my day has been from morning, and my attitude will determine my delivery. So please remember, there is no variable cast on stone that it must be. It is you as a researcher, based on your problem, that identifies the IVDV, identifies the confounding, and now number 3 is a moderator, moderating variable. And just like the word states, to modify, to pacify, it comes in to modify or to pacify the relationship between IVDV. Again, remember, we have IVDV. But you realize in this relationship, there is another variable that is also likely to pacify this relationship. If I use the example of a home setting, now it is not a girlfriend, it is a house girl. You don't fight a house girl unless probably they also become your second wife. You don't fight them. You actually treat them very well because this is the person you live with your child. So this house help, this house manager is a moderating variable. He or she has come to modify, to pacify, to make this relationship between you and him to be good. Because you see, when we all come from work and we can sit and ask for tea, ask for food, someone is bringing, we are happy because we are resting, hypothetically. So this house manager, you don't fight them, not like the girlfriend, not like the confounder. This is a modifier. So moderating variable is a second independent variable that the researcher selects because they have identified it as a variable that has an influence on the basic relationship between primary IV and DV. So it is a second independent variable. And when you are talking about a moderator, when you are measuring at the data analysis, you first look at how these two, what we call multicollinearity, is there. What is the type of a relationship between the moderator and the DV? Then how does the moderator influence the DV? Then how does the IV influence the DV? Now, let me use another simpler example, hoping that it will be more clear. Assume that we want to find the relationship between X and Y, and we calculate the correlation, and it becomes plus 0.5. Moderate, positive, linear correlation. So between X and Y. But then we bring it a moderator A. We bring in a moderator A. And now, when we measure the correlation between X and Y, it becomes 0.8. So it is a high positive linear correlation between X and Y. What has made it rise? It is because of the moderator. So the moderator is selected because it has an influence on the dependent, and it pacifies the relationship between primary IV and primary DV, or the DV. That is what we call the moderating. And then we have controlled variable. Control comes from the extraneous, This, like we have mentioned, they are very relevant in an experimental design. They are the ones that are kept unchanged throughout an experiment. And please, when I say an experiment, I don't mean the chemistry practicals that we did when we were in basic education. The preparation of oxygen using manganese 4 oxide and something else I have forgotten. We are talking about experimental design in research. Experimental design in research. So when you're conducting an experiment, and of course, for us as social science, we do quasi-experimental, and I will be discussing about designs. The variable that is kept constant throughout the experiment in order to see the change between IV-DV is what we call a controlled variable, For instance, I want to bring in a new teaching method. I want to introduce a new teaching method in my secondary school. So I will use particular class X. So with this X class, I will teach them with the same old method, determine their performance, and the same class, I teach them with the new method, and I measure the performance. If there is a difference between the two, then you can now tell people that let us start using this new teaching method. So that particular class is your controlled variable. You did not change the students. You used the students before and after in that experiment. You taught them before using an old method. You use them the same class with the new one so that you can measure the performance. And that before I check whether there is any question. Finally, as you look at variables, so we have talked about IV-DV, confounding, intervening, and moderate, and extraneous. Then we have talked about moderating. Then we have talked about control. Variables, the ones we have discussed, can be classified in terms of the number of mathematical values they take within a continuum. A continuum starts from infinity to infinity on both negative and positive. So the mathematical values they can take within a given continuum is what we classify as mathematical classification of variables. We have variables that can only take whole numbers, and they are called discrete variables, and they are the ones that can take the infinite number. They are called continuous. So discrete means if I am measuring the number of children that you have, there is no way I can say they are 2.5. Even if a child was born today, she or he is a human being. It will be one person, So when you talk about number of children, it is a discrete variable because it can only take a whole number. It can only take a specific number, a definite number. Your gender, unless now, of course, now we know there are those who are in between, but let's look at it from the way we know our society to be. We know there is a male and there is a female. So there is no way you would be in between. Even those who are changing, they don't become today men and tomorrow women. If I change to be a man, I will now be in that class of being a man fully. If I'm talking about your eye color, they are blue or brown, there is no way there will be any in between. So those are discrete, and they're also called categorical because they can only take whole numbers. Then we have continuous or quantitative. They take any value within an infinite series of possible values. From infinity to infinity, they can take any value. And that is why we normally round off. So if I'm measuring my height, I can say it is 5.712459. That can go on to infinity. That is why we round off and say I am 5.2. If you talk about weight, the same. The distance is the same. You can say the distance from here to Nairobi is 50 points, and you add, but then you round off and you say it is 50 kilometers. And that brings us to the first question, which was on the type of variables. And if there is any question, anyone with a question, let me just check from the chat. Please feel free to put your question on the chat. Lawrence can come say thank you very much. My problem is about writing the literature review. We shall get there. How do we go by the headings in writing the literature review? Just to mention briefly, the headings in literature review emanate from the variables of your study. And if it is, Lawrence also says, if it is from the objectives, then how do we select that? Objectives, variables of the study are selected from literature based on your problem. I'm learning a lot. Thank you, Carla Wario. Insightful. Thank you, Rodney. So I don't see any question. Please feel free to put any question that you have. So finally, this is another animal that many students have a problem with, scales of measurement. And imagine there are only 4. They are only 4, but they are so key that if you do not understand the scale of measurement, then imagine even your analysis will be a problem. Even the way you construct your questionnaire will be a problem, because you must be clear that my first variable is on let me remember one that we had mentioned, is on attitude, for instance. How do I measure attitude? I will use a Likert scale. Will my Likert scale be ordinal or will it be interval? Because if it is ordinal, the way I'm going to analyze an ordinal data is different from the way I analyze a continuous data or an interval data. When you're talking about a question like gender, I want to find out males and females. When I get 10 and 20, which measures of central tendency would I use with such a categorical variable, which is measured at the nominal level? Then if I'm using the measures of central tendency, I can only use the mode. These are things that should be at your fingertips. You should be looking at your questionnaire and you can tell question 1 nominal, question 2 nominal, question 3 interval, question 4 ratio, question 5, because the way you construct the scales of measurement determines your analysis. And that is why it is said in research, before you start writing, when you have identified a problem, see your work up to the conclusions you will make. Many students are in a hurry to start writing. Writing is not an issue. Imagine you have all the books in the library and you'll be referring to them and making a case for your point. But you have to keep asking, now that I have identified capacity building as one of my variables, How will I measure capacity building? What type of questions will I ask? Will I use Likert scale-like questions, or will I use questions where I'm asking, have you ever attended training? What was the content of the training? How did you know? And because if I put a scale-like question for me to be able to explain my variable, then the way I will analyze it will be very different if my questions are, have you ever attended training, yes or no? It will be very different. Yeah, Mukami, is there a book for this? Yes, there is, and I'll be sharing in a minute once we look at the scales of measurement. So when we are talking about scales of measurement, scale of measurement is the classification that describes the nature of information within the numbers. Remember, we have just said mathematical classification. So those numbers that variables are given, what is the information that we can pick from them? What is the information that we pick from them? That is what we are talking about. And there are only four, but very important. We have nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio, and they flow like that. Nominal is the lowest, followed by ordinal, then interval, then ratio. We start with the simplest, the lowest, nominal. Nominal scale deals with variables that are non-numeric. That means numbers have no value. Numbers have no value. They are used for identification only. In very simple terms, and I want you to remember, and if you're writing, please write nominal names. Nominal names. The work of nominal is to name, and it normally names in a category. It normally tells you, am I a smoker or not a smoker? Am I a student or not a student? Am I married or not married? Am I a female or not a female? Am I a male or not a male? With whatever number that is assigned to those, that variable measured at that has no numerical value. If I want to determine the number of males and females in this class, I can say when I put 1, that represents females, 2 represents male. This 1 and 2 has no numerical value. It is only to identify so that when I see 1, I know they are females. When I see 2, I know they are males. I can as well interchange and say 2 is the males, and I can say 1 is the male and 2 is the female. Most of us, I'm sure we are students. We have been given admission numbers. If my number is L50 stroke 10,000 stroke 2024, and yours is L50 stroke 10 stroke 2024, it doesn't mean that you are better than me in terms of performance. Those are numbers that universities will use to identify a student. And that is why once you leave and graduate, that number will be given to somebody else because it means nothing. It is only to identify the student called Lydia Wabogo. He is L50 stroke 10,000. It is identify another one called Mukami. She is L50 stroke 10 stroke 2030. You know, they are not anything. So any number attached to them, it has no value at all. So the work of nominal scale is to determine whether you belong or you don't belong. And I had given an example. You are either a smoker or not a smoker. You are either a student or not a student. You cannot be in the two. You know, they are exclusive. So nominal, it names by placing people or whatever in two categories. And there is no way you can belong to two categories. So if you are male, you are a male. If you are female, you are a female. If your skin color is white, you are white. If it is brown, it is brown. You know, that is what the work of nominal is. And remember, any number you attach to it has no numerical value. It does not carry quantitative weight. It does not carry quantitative weight at all. Then when you talk about ordinal orders. So we have said nominal names, ordinal orders. There is some order. There is some order. There is some ranking. There is some ranking. So it's slightly higher than nominal. But the differences does not matter. The difference between these ranks does not matter. It does not matter. So ordinal looks at variables where order matters. There is some order. There is some ranking. So the work of ordinal is to put variables into categories, and in this category there is some ranking, there is some order. However, the distance between the ranks is not equal, and it is not even important. Again, any number attached to them, again, it does not carry any quantitative value. I want to give an example. If we talk about the grading system, many universities will say 70 to 100 is an A, 60 to 69 is a B, 50 to 59 is a C, below 50 is a fail. Now, how many points are below this 49? Is below 49. How many numbers are below 49? Remember, it can go to even the minus. Then look at between 50 and 59, between 60 and 69. Then look at above 70%. How many would be? So we have some order. There is some order. But the difference between these ranks is not equal. It is not equal. So there is some ranking. If I say, how often do you brush your teeth? And of course, I am using this as an example. But remember, the word often in research is a very relative word that is not measurable, or something that requires me to say a little, somewhat little, or more or less. There is some order. There is some order. But the difference between this order, this rank, is not equal. It is not equal. Again, any number we attach to them has no quantitative value. And that is why variables measured at on nominal and ordinal, they are called categorical. They are called categorical because they exist in categories. The one that names in that category, they are called nominal. The ones that are ranked and the difference is not equal is called ordinal. So you have ranked in terms of some order. You can see like a lot, a little, not at all. All, agree, strongly agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. And we will be talking later on in other lessons on Likert scale. And we will ask ourselves whether Likert scale is measured at ordinal or it is measured at interval. So if I am measuring my Likert scale at ordinal and I say strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or neither agrees or disagrees, when I put 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, those 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, they carry no quantitative value. It is only to identify. That is at ordinal. But if I transfer the same to be interval, then they carry quantitative value. So remember those first two, they are called nominal. They are called nominal because categorical, because the two of them categorizes, puts variables into categories. The one that only names, nominal. The one that orders, ordinal. Then we move to the last two when we have interval. Interval and ratio, they are the last two. I want you to remember, that interval has no absolute zero. Interval has no absolute zero. And when we say absolute zero, give me a minute. When we say absolute zero, we mean total absence of a property. Total absence of a property. Now, let me first explain this point. So interval scales are numerical. We know the differences between the values. They are equal. It is not like the one we have in the categorical, but it does not start from an absolute zero. Please note that. The word absolute means total absence of the property. It starts from an arbitrary zero. Now, let me give an example. And the example that we mainly use is temperature. So when I say that the room I am in is 25 degrees Celsius, it did not start counting that temperature from zero because 0 degrees is temperature. So 0 degrees does not mean absence of temperature. When I say it is now 3:09, it is 3 p.m., It did not start counting from zero time. There is no time that there was zero. When I say my attitude is at 5, there is nobody who has a zero attitude. That is why Likert scale is measured at interval, when now it is the scores have a numerical value. So interval, what I would need you to note is that it does not start from an absolute zero. And it is numerical. It is in numbers, but those numbers do not start from an arbitrary zero. There is no zero. It normally starts from an artificial zero. So when I say the temperature is 30, it did not start from zero. Actually, zero is temperature. When we say it is 00, it is time, it is midnight. So there is no time we will say there is absence of time. But if I say that my weight is 50 kilograms, if my weight is 50, I started from a true zero, and that is what we call ratio. So the difference between interval and ratio is because ratio starts with a true zero position. It starts from a true zero position. So when I say that my income is 10,000 Kenya shillings, for instance, it starts from a 0 point. When I say my height is 5.2, it starts from a 0 point to 5.2. So the difference between interval and ratio, it is in terms of the numbers they take. One has a number but does not start from a 0 point. The other one has a number that starts from a 0 point. Very important points to note. Number one, we have said nominal and ordinal are both classified as categorical because they put the categories, the variables into categories. The one that only names is nominal. The ones that orders is ordinal. Number two, interval and ratio are classified together as continuous because they deal with numbers. The difference is interval has no absolute zero. Ratio has an absolute zero. The other point is you can convert a higher scale into a lower one, but you cannot do vice versa. For instance, this, I assume this is performance of students. Let me take them that way. Or it can be our age. This can be our age. This is our age. So some of us are 12, 15, 17, etc. So this is measured at ratio scale. So this is ratio. And I can convert this into ordinal. I can now create groups of 12 to 16 years with a class interval of 5, 17 to 21, 22 to 26, 27 to 31, above 32. I've only used the data that I have. So I can start telling and say how many are between 12 and 16 years. Then we have 2. I know 3. We have this one, and we have the one of 12, and we have 14. So I have 3 people. You know, how many are between 17 and 21, etc. But I cannot take this ordinal, I cannot take this one and take it back here. So I cannot convert categorical to continuous, but I can convert continuous into categorical. Finally, scales of measurement determines the statistical tools you will use to analyze data. They determine the statistical tools. So without knowing the scale of measurement, you cannot determine the statistical tool to use. For instance, we go back to this. If I have this data, if I have this one at ratio scale, and I want to use measures of central tendency, I can easily get the mean age, I can get the mode, I can calculate the median as long as I arrange the data. I can do that. When I have ordinal data with the scale, with the measures of central tendency, I can only use mode. I can only say the mode or class are those who are between 12 and 16. You know, so you must, even when you're talking about inferential data, if I wanted to use chi-square, I wanted to use t-test. With this one, I can use t-test. With this one, I will use chi-square. Here, I cannot use chi because chi is for categorical, especially at nominal data. If I want to use the statistical tools at the correlation, here, I can only use Spearman. I can only use Pearson. Here, I can only use Pearson. Here, I will only use Spearman. How do you know that? You are only able to know that if you have identified, if you are able to identify the scale of measurement. And that is why I have mentioned that, please, these scales of measurement are so important. Please read and reread them so that you can have the scales of measurement at your fingertip. They should be at the fingertips. So as we end our lesson, I want to show. Somebody had asked me about the book, and I would want to show you where you can easily get the book, and it is easily available on my website. I have a website called Research Methods Class. When you click on it, that is how you will get the website. And at the website, you can be able to read my blogs, the ebooks, and the courses. For instance, when you click on the blog, you are able to read the blogs that I have written. I have one on paradigms, I have introduction to research, and many others. Now, when you go to the courses, I started by asking whether there is a difference between topic and title. Yes, there is. So I have done a course on passing your thesis and dissertation, where I have discussed all that you need from the time you start your thesis, from the first thing you do until the time you are defending. Is a whole video, 12 videos of what you need, how you select a problem, how you write a title, how you do a topic, how you write questions, objectives, hypotheses, how you analyze, and it is only $45. So this one is a paid course of passing your thesis, and you can get it for only $45. I also teach SPSS. I have two modes of learning. There is SPSS, which is I call physical, because we normally meet through Zoom on Thursdays. Like now, a new class is starting on Thursday. We normally meet on Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. East African time, 7 to 9 p.m. for 15 hours. Every Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. I teach IBM SPSS. I'll teach you all the descriptive and inferential statistics that you need to analyze data. Again, this is a paid course, which is $149. I have also a fully online SPSS course that you can read on your own. There are about 8 videos that are well demonstrated, and that one goes for $250 USD. And then, of course, there is the research method, which is free of charge, which is on the website. If you click on this one, you will be able to start learning. If you click on start learning, then you will be able to identify. It helps you go through, all the research method, and they are all here. So whatever you would need, from the very basic one to the final one of referencing, you will again get it under this one, So all the questions, all the lessons on sampling, on instrument analysis, proposal writing, the structure, the validity and reliability, how you do them, research approaches, all of them, I have classified the videos into topics. So you can see, like, the fundamentals has got 3 videos which are seen. So you only need to click on that and you are able to read. And then we also have the books, the research method. Someone had asked, I have written 2 books. There is the research method book, and then there is a book on M&E, which you can easily get by clicking on reading. This one is $18. This one is $25. And with that, you will be able to read all that you require. When you have the book, when you have these lessons, when you have the YouTube channel, and now you add it to what you are doing on your own, you will be a researcher. So let me see whether there is a question. Anita says this lecture is very good and easy to understand. Thank you very much. Well explained. Cobble, I see your comment. Thank you, Jane. Great class. Kara says, when I was defending my proposal, one of the panelists asked me why I have adopted moderator instead of intervening. Now it is very clear to me. Maybe I should have shared this so that we all see. So when I was defending my proposal, one of the panelists asked me why I have adopted moderator instead of intervening. Now it is very clear to me why I was asked that question. Thank you, and I'm happy. When we learn, that is the essence of being in class. Carla, thank you very much. Let me see whether there is any other question, any other comment, insightful? Lawrence, I hope what we have talked about briefly, though I will be talking about it more when we are looking at literature review and the conceptual framework. That is what we should look at. So I am happy that we were able to do that. So the lesson will still be available on YouTube. Anything that you'd want to refer to, you are free to go back to YouTube and refer. If you have any question, feel free to put it on the comment section. Many of you, I know I have reached out to you through your WhatsApp. If you have a question and you'd want to write to me, feel free to write on either email or even on WhatsApp. I will be able to respond to you. Otherwise, I'm grateful. Our next class, we hold classes 2 times a month. So our next class will be the 3rd Thursday of this month by God's grace. Thank you very much and enjoy being research. Oh, one question. How do we deal with extraneous? Allow me to show this. It has just come when we were about to finish. How do we deal with extraneous variables? Here, sorry, because maybe you are joining late. Extraneous variables, we said they are confounding. They are confounding variables that the researcher must be aware of and must control them. So we normally deal with extraneous variables by first, you must know them, you must see them, and you must control. And control is what we call removing the effect of. You must remove the effect of the extraneous variable. And I had given an example. I said, if I am conducting a study in the capital city of Kenya, which is Nairobi, Nairobi has the slum areas and it has the high-end areas. In both places, they are primary and secondary school. Assume I want to measure the performance of secondary school, for instance, or even primary school. I know that the socio-economic status of the parents in these both 2 places will affect my study, because the performance in the slum may not be the same as the performance in the high-end areas. So if I realize that socio-economic status will be a variable that can affect my study, I can remove the effect of. So in that case, it is my extraneous variable. I remove the effect of it by only using the schools in the slum areas or only using the schools in the high-end areas, because you deal with the same socioeconomic status. But here we also said that there is no variable that has been cast on stone, that it must be. It is you as a researcher, based on your problem, based on literature review that you have done, that you are able to identify this is intervening, this is extraneous, this is a moderator, and they must be explained when you are drawing your conceptual framework. When you are drawing your conceptual framework. And the next time we meet, most likely we will be talking about conceptual and theoretical framework. And I will explain to you the methods you use to present conceptual. It doesn't mean that it has to be drawn all the time, no. So here, that is how we deal with extraneous. They must be controlled. And you can get more information from this lecture from the book that I have just shown, which is available on the website. Thank you, Hilary. I hope I have answered the question. Okami says this lecture was great. Thank you very much. So I want to edit at that point. Please, let's keep the discussion going. Put questions on the comment section of the website, on the YouTube. That is where I'm able to pick this question, and I'm able to now be able to prepare a class so that I respond to this question. Thank you very much and have a good time wherever you are. Thank you.